We will smash the like button on the seas and oceans. We will smash the like button in the fields and the hills. We will subscribe to the channel. We shall never surrender. Recording in progress. Well, I'm here with Gern Blanston. How are you, Gern?
I'm doing well, Pat. How are you?
I'm doing really well.
Good to see you.
We're here to talk. It's great to see you. We're here to talk about this book, Churchill and Orwell, written by Thomas E. Ricks, The Fight for Freedom. But first, I'm going to do a couple of orders of business. We're going to smash the like button because you guys like us. Subscribe to the channel. That helps promote the content up the ladder. And I actually have another channel, which is getting really close to monetization, my second monetized channel. So I'll put a description below, and I actually learned how to make cards. So I think I'll put a card up here too, and you guys can help me out with that. That'd be awesome. So this book, I read this book because you recommended it. But why did you read this book? Why did you pick this book?
Yeah, great question. So I was familiar with the author. I've heard him interviewed a few times on the radio, probably when he was flacking other books. I follow him on Twitter. I'm not sure exactly why, but he always has a lot of, I don't know, kind of trenchant commentary. It's not the usual radioactive blast that you get from Twitter. It was reasoned, an opinion you like to hear on, what's going on in politics, world events. He'd weigh in, and I like to hear what he has to say. So I think I heard him. I heard him interviewed on local radio station back when this book came out, which I guess was around 2019 or so.
Okay.
And it sounded very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspect that he wrote it because, like a lot of people who are historically aware, it was an effort to try and make sense of current events because, of course, for the previous 4 years, we were in a kind of a state of national upheaval, which continues to this day. And I think this book was his attempt to address that situation through historical figures. And what can they tell us about that moment?
Well, that's what history does best when it does that. But I thought it was earlier than that for some reason. I thought it was 2017.
Could very well.
Copyright's 2017. Now, obviously, he could have been talking about it 2 years after that fact. But I took that to mean that when he was writing it, he was not. He would not have been aware of what was going to transpire with the previous administration as
You're
we
right.
speak. So I was I thought it was interesting that either he was a harbinger or he had suspected that something crazy might happen. But that
blows my theory out of the water. If that's the copyright date, then yeah, he would have to be writing before the 2016 election and felt something was in the water.
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly we could have suspected that something was going to happen, but
yeah.
I don't know that anybody could predict exactly what was going to happen.
No.
But to stick with the history for a little bit, I mean, these are two figures that I've read. I've read Churchill. When I first moved to the area that I live in now, there's a library in walking distance, a small library. But
is it a Carnegie library?
No, but later it became associated with that system. It's a memorial library that was built. It's housed. It's in a. They call it a mansion. It's a three-story structure. It's nothing that elaborate, but I mean it's nice. It's old. It's got big, tall windows. If it were a house, it'd be pretty luxuriant. Luxurious at the time when people lived in there. But it's nothing like the Carnegie. Yeah, But before they were affiliated with the Carnegie Library System, and you could order things online and you could get things sent there. This is, like early 90s. Mm-hmm. You actually had to go to the library and you could order a book at the desk, but it was real big to do. So I just pillaged their history section, which wasn't all that big, but I literally decimated it. I probably read every 10th book. And, because
wow. Finally, I don't have the urge to, my pedantic urge to give the definition of decimate. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I try to do that as I go sometimes to help people out. But well, we were just talking about Roman history a little bit before, and there'll be another video. Hopefully, when Robin comes on, we'll talk about that. But yeah, so I did go through it, and they had Churchill's World War II memoir, and I was like, "Wow, I've never read this." And I was just coming off of the Civil War trilogy with written by Shelby Foote, so I felt like I was able to do a 6-volume series. But what was interesting, and this comes up in this book, Rick's book, which is, I got a little bogged down after the second volume, and at the time I couldn't quite figure out why. I thought, well, this is the good part, we're in the midst of the war, and now I get to see what Churchill's thinking and the grand strategy, and and all this stuff, and it wasn't quite as uplifting, eloquent. It wasn't what I expected.
Now you know why.
As good as what had come forward. Now I know, because Thomas says that he had a lot of help, and he kind of lost steam after the second book. And in the first 2 volumes, he was referring to notes that he had taken, during the war, I guess. And then at some point, he must have gotten so busy that he was unable to do that. That's what I figure. I mean, at some point he didn't do it, but I was just figuring events of the day. I mean, for crying out loud, it's 1941. The lights are going out all over Europe, and you're going to think about 1946. I don't think so. You know what I mean? Like, it would have been enough to think about the next day. But yeah, so it was interesting to see that he said that he had a whole committee of people helping him write it, but that the last 4 volumes were pretty much written by somebody else.
Right, with loosely based on his notes, but possibly with not a lot of input from him. So Churchill in this book, I found I really didn't know that much about him before reading the book. Probably the cursory knowledge that many Americans have, which is very cursory. But he explores his. Well, let me back up a little bit. What I learned was that Churchill was actually what we would now call, he had a desire to be an influencer as a young man. He, I suppose back in the day, they would have said, wanted to make a name for himself. He had to go do something to make a name for yourself, have an adventure, something perhaps exotic, out of the ordinary, that you could hold up in front of other people and say, look at me, look at this thing I did. Doesn't this make me unique? So it's almost social media like in that regard, that he decides to go, help me out here. Which country was it? Do you recall? He was in country,
South Africa
with the British Army for really a very short period of time. 6 months, I think, total is his entire military service, something like that. And
yeah, I think it was. I think he went as a well, he joined the cavalry. We know that. His father was disappointed by that, actually.
Well, his father was deeply disappointed in him, apparently throughout most of his life, and was wow. You can't imagine that Churchill wasn't deeply influenced by the type of father he had.
Yeah.
Because to have a father express in such excoriating terms what a deep disappointment he's been to him, that had to play a big psychological factor in who Churchill was to eventually become.
Yeah, in fact, Rick says that. He said there's 2 things that could have happened. In Rick's estimation, one, he could have cowered up and curled up into a ball of self, pity and hatred and whatever is whatever other negative thing you want to put after the self hyphen. But instead, or he could have risen to the occasion and broken out of that, his father's model, and that's what he ended up doing. But I guess when he wrote that letter that we both read, Churchill's father writes this just crushing letter, saying, like, basically, you're just going to amount to nothing. You're just going to be one of those wastrels who's going to go through life and not do anything important. And and don't even bother to answer this part of the letter. And I will not accept or consider anything else that you say about your so-called accomplishments. Oh my gosh. Now, there is a little bit of explanation in this book that he's on his deathbed. He's in pain when he's writing this, but still, I mean, even under the influence of medication or in great pain, do you really reach out to your son and just berate him like that?
No. So you might imagine that he might be driven to extremes, but you have to start out you already have to be starting from a point where you have ill will towards your son who you feel is disappointment. Sure. Let's say medication dialed it up to 11, but clearly there was already, deep resentment and disappointment there. Trying to, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if he's writing the letter or if he's dictating the letter. If he's dictating the letter, then I give him a little more leeway. If he's writing the letter, oh my gosh, when you're writing a letter, you have time to consider your words and the impact of those words. So, come on. But I don't know. We don't know. I don't know what the case is. It's not clear in the book. So.
Well, and he was dying from syphilis, so we should mention that as well.
That's true, because that can make you mad. Yeah.
Right. But still, the effect had to have been a lifelong one for men to feel they have so disappointed their fathers. Calling Dr. Freud, there's a lot to be said there, and surely it's a key factor in who you become and what you choose to do with your life.
And his mom.
Yes,
she's a playgirl basically. She apparently had multiple lovers.
His American mother.
That's right, and had a tattoo, which ladies of society did not have tattoos at that time. Only ladies of the night had tattoos of that variety, and yet she was well noted for having an active social life, is the way it's put, which I absolutely adore that phrase, because now who cares, right? But no. They're coming off of Victorian England, I mean, like this is the late 1800s, early 1900s, like, free love didn't exist yet. That didn't come around until the 20s, basically, or, and really until the 60s. But like there was a kind of a free love movement in the 20s. But so like, but she had I like the one quote she said as she was getting older, I guess into what she considered older, in her 40s. She said, "I shall never get over the fact that I am not the most beautiful woman in the room."
So to touch on that for a moment, I read a book a few years ago, which was very out of character for me, but the review that I read just made it sound so interesting. It was a book about Ava Gardner, who was married to Frank Sinatra, famous movie actress. She was one of the most beautiful women in Hollywood. And it was largely the story of, it was a meta story. It was a story about an aborted attempt for her to write an autobiography with the help of a writer, because this was in the 1980s. She needed the money. She and Sinatra parted ways in, I think, the early 60s. And she needed to be kept in the style to which she was accustomed to. And the big thing I remember about that book was that her beauty was so inimical to who she was, such a part of her, that when you lose that, she would say time and again during those 1980s interview sessions for this book that never came to be, how crushing it was for her that she had lost this supernatural ability to cloud men's minds. Basically, it is a superpower that you're gorgeous, you radiate. Heads turn, forks drop in the restaurant, and for possibly men, but it affects women much more because it's harder to grow old gracefully, as men are accused of doing. That to lose that power is very difficult. So, long way to say that I think I understand to a certain extent where Winston Churchill's mother was probably coming from when she wrote that. Addendum to that little short story. She never wrote the autobiography because it was going to contain all the juicy bits that would make it highly saleable. Frank Sinatra found out. He would be deeply embarrassed by everything that was in there. he gave her more money than she would have received to have the book published, and she was financially saved.
It's fair. It's a fair deal, you know?
Plus, he still loved her.
Yeah. I mean, well, of course. I mean, see, that's the thing we can go on about that. But like, at some point you loved something about the person if you married, So, even if things go sour, but we don't have to get into all this kind of stuff.
No.
We can go back to Churchill, which, now that we covered his parents' background, one of the things that I found interesting, because he becomes such a man of letters, but early on, there's this quote that I'd never heard. And he said, it's important for a young man not to read too many good books and to pollute. Well, he doesn't say pollute. How does he say it? He says, I think I actually wrote it down. Don't tax the brain while you're young by reading too many good books. Chew your food like an old man.
Well, I wonder if he took his own advice there. Because, and I forget that it's been a couple of weeks since I finished the book. Some details were already eluding me.
Right.
But one of the things I learned was that he was no academic superstar at all. He was quite average. And also he was kind of a charity case for the public school he was in. And remember, when you're in England, public school means private school means public school, very confusing. And this school was bound to take a certain number of students who were not overachievers. That was another reason for his father's disappointment in him. So you expect, again, with that cursory level of knowledge that most Americans have, you think Churchill, he must be type A, driven. And usually people like that who ascend in the way that he did are that way probably innately from birth. Not him. He didn't have that kind of a story. He didn't catch fire until later.
Well, he's a bully too, they say, like at one point a kid stabs him with a pen in the chest, and his mother says, well, I'm sure he deserved it. Probably tormented the heck out of that kid for him to do that, so his parents were not like, oh my gosh, our good little boy. No, they knew
Billy would never do that.
Yeah, they knew their son, right?
Exactly.
But so I don't know. How do we want to keep going with Churchill, or we want to flip to George?
So I don't know that there's that much in Orwell's formative years that is really that notable.
Right.
I think Churchill's history is a little more interesting because he's born of parents of higher standing, shall we say?
Yeah.
Orwell's not.
Right.
And one of the things I really learned in this book, I learned much more about the English class system than I knew before. And that plays a big part in
it does
explaining the background of the two of them and some of their motivations and the way they see the world.
Well, it does. I mean, Orwell's father, right? Orwell grows up in India, right?
That's right.
And his father's he's not a policeman. He's like I don't know what he is exactly. He's like a civil servant, but he has some kind of authority, power of authority. I don't know that he's actually a policeman. I think it says at one point, I think one of the chapter headings is Orwell the policeman. Orwell ends up doing something like that very briefly, or actually not briefly, 4 years, I think, which seems really out of character for what we know about Orwell and authority after that.
Right.
But during that process, there was one incident when they talk about Orwell's experience, not as a really young man, but as a young adult in that line of work. Apparently, he was part of a detail to take a man to the gallows to be executed. And he noted that the man, as they're walking to the scaffold or wherever they were going to do the deed, I'm not sure the method of execution, the man steps out of the way, the condemned man steps out of the way of a mud puddle. At that point, Orwell has this great revelation, this man is alive. He's vital. He's still reacting to life, like we would step out of the way of the mud puddle. If you're a condemned person, you're going to die in a few minutes. Why? Who cares? Right. But no, and he said the waste of life, just in that whole process, that was the thing that he got out of that experience was that, this is a human being. This is a vital human being who could accomplish and do things, but we're going to selectively terminate his life. And it was just, I thought that was pretty, I thought that was pretty profound. I'm sure he was deeply impacted by it.
It's extremely profound. I mean, it's the experience that I think any of us have had if we've come across, say, a dead bird lying on the ground. And I always think of the phrase, when I see a live bird, the phrase, the spark of life. The barrier that separates the dead bird on the ground from the one who's hopping around grabbing berries off of the bush, it's very thin, very narrow. And it's so easy to cross from one to the other that it makes you appreciate the magical nature of whatever that spark of life is. And of course, we know biologically what it is, but that doesn't really capture it, does it? No, of course it doesn't. It's something much more bigger, much more big than that. It is something that's kind of magical. And I think that he was having that exact same realization right there, that even though this criminal, perhaps he was awful, maybe he did hideous things, we don't know. But at that particular moment, the knowledge that you are about to kill that spark, even with the most hideous criminals, you'd have to be missing some element of humanity not to really consider it hard.
Well, there's two moments in each of their early military careers that go on. So I guess we should go back to Churchill and talk about South Africa. What would end up being the Boer War? He was there, and he was, he went into the cavalry. I was saying before, I guess he went to the cavalry, but that was not a prestigious assignment. Mm-hmm. See, I would have thought the cavalry would have been like the cavalry, the infantry is like everybody, but the cavalry was where rich kids went because they could afford the horses.
Right. They knew how to ride.
Yeah. But Winston liked it because he liked the uniform. Mm-hmm. So he has elements of his mother in there where he likes the dress, and he talks about gold, and he talks about all these wonderful colors and how he feels sorry for Brown.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that's something that would carry on throughout his life. Rarely as prime minister during the war years did he miss an opportunity to wear military dress. Think of how many times he appeared with Roosevelt in their meetings on public display, and he would be wearing. I'm not sure what the alignment is. I mean, he was, of course, the former Vice Lord of the Admiralty,
Lord of the Admiralty,
the equivalent of our Secretary of the Navy,
right?
And there's something about the British system that allows you to continue to wear the military outfit. Of course, in the United States, with the hard line separation between civilian and military, that would never occur. But he was clearly into regalia, which I think most British aristocrats are. That's kind of their thing.
It's part of it's part of the badge of office. It's part of the dress. And like you said, like a young man who is going to embark on any kind of political career would have to have a military I won't say it would have to, but a military background where one achieved something in a military fashion would do wonders for an entree into the political arena.
And that used to be a near requirement in the American system. If you wanted to be president, you had to have had military experience in order for people to trust you as commander in chief. And of course, that was broken by Clinton. And has never been replaced since then.
It was definitely true in ancient Rome. I can tell you that. Like, you had to be, basically, in order to reach the higher levels of office, unless there was something physically wrong with you that did not allow you to do that. If you had an infirmity of some kind, but otherwise, you did military service. The incidents, though, that I wanted to talk about with Churchill. So he's writing for a newspaper, basically something like Stars and Stripes, I guess, American World War II military. And he's attached to a regiment. I forget the size of I may be using the wrong words, platoon, regiment, squad. I don't know in this particular case, but they're taking a railroad, apparently a rail line, and they're walking along this rail line. They're taking it from the Dutch settlers, the Boers. And as they're doing that, they come under fire and enemy forces. And Churchill ends up organizing an organized retreat. They're over, there's too many of the enemy forces. So he helps to organize the retreat and subsequently is captured. But he says something about being shot at, which I thought was really fascinating. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember reading it, but I couldn't do the quotation. I'm hoping that you have it in front of you because it's pretty good.
Nothing in life is so exhilarating as to be shot at without result.
Yes. It's always great when they don't hit you, I imagine.
It's bravado. There's no doubt. In fact, Ricks, who apparently was a reporter during the invasion, I think it was the second Iraq War.
Yes, that's right.
The U.S. Iraq War. He was attached, similar to what Churchill was, I guess. He's making a comparison. And he's saying, yeah, well, the problem with being under fire is you don't know when it's going to stop, and you don't know where it's coming from a lot of times and all this sort of thing. So he said there's probably some bravado in there, and I'm sure there is. But, yeah, Orwell, unfortunately, has the opposite thing happen to him. He gets under fire and he gets shot in the throat.
Right. So we should step back a little bit and talk about how he actually arrived in that position.
Right.
And this speaks to, he's a young man who's deeply earnest. So we're talking about the 1930s when the world has turned upside down for Western democracies because it's a global depression. Democracy is in not just the United States, but in Europe. There are deep questions as to whether it functions because it seems to have failed. Democracy does not seem to be capable of dealing with the depression, ending it, and finding a way out of it. And there are competing ideologies like communism and fascism, which seem to offer a way out. And of course, communism now is we think about Stalin, we think of the purges, we think of the gulags, we think of the deaths of millions at the hands of the state. But this is at a time before any of that was known and before any of it had happened.
Right.
So from that perspective, to people of the 30s, communism seemed like it might not be a bad deal. And it's got to be better than what we're going through right now because I'm tired of standing in line at the soup kitchen. So Orwell is having the same evaluation. He's hard left. And interestingly, he's not what we would have today. You would have a Twitter warrior where you would sit at home and espouse your political opinions all day. He actually does something. He packs his suitcase and he joins the leftist movement in Franco's against Franco in Spain
with his wife.
With his wife, which
his wife comes along, like his
which
wife
is insane.
comes too. So
putting your money where your mouth is.
Well, there's a couple things going on here, I think. So, there's a lot I want to say about that. The grand political movements. Maybe I can go back to that, but what I'm thinking of right now is that women's suffrage in the United States only happened in the last decade or so, right? Yeah. Prior to this. So we're talking about women getting the right to vote in what, 1920?
24.
24, I think, was the first election, but I think it was passed in 20. So the first presidential election was 24. The communist system very loudly said that women have equal rights to men.
Right.
That was a big appeal for a lot of women in the West, that their political voice would be heard. So I could see that. Now, we don't know a ton about her in this book, but you could see where she was young and vital and she was willing to go fight as well. So something happens though when Orwell gets there. He's like many people, Hemingway included, and he's talked about in here. People from other countries joined what was called the International Brigade. But he was dissuaded by a friend who was already in Spain from doing that.
Mhm.
And his friend said, no, don't go to the international brigades. Those guys are jerks. I know the captain over there. I know one of the officers. You don't want to go there. Come with me. We're fighting. We're actually fighting. We're actually going to the front lines. We're not talking about it. We're going. You're going to see some action. And Orwell wanted to see combat. That's what I've led to believe in this book, anyway.
Yeah, it sounds that way to me as well.
So he joins this, unbeknownst to him that this was going to have political consequences. He joins a brigade, and it's a communist brigade.
Right.
But unfortunately for him, it's the POUM, which I can't remember the Spanish words that stands for. But it turns out to be a very what ends up being an unpopular sect of the communist contingent. Yeah. And because
we're not the People's Front of Judea, we're the People's Judean Front.
It's considered the Trotskyite.
Right.
At a point when Stalin doesn't want Trotsky to have any influence anywhere. So so
Russian Soviet-backed communists are quietly disposing of the members of Orwell's group at this point.
That's right. In fact, he gets hurt. When he gets hurt at the front line, he gets shot through the throat. And what's interesting, I think, is the reaction. So like Churchill doesn't get shot the first time he's in combat, and he has this bravado quote, right? Mm-hmm. And then Orwell gets shot in the throat, and he describes it. Mm-hmm. He describes like what it's like. He's like, I knew I was wounded, but I didn't really know where. Mm-hmm. And then as I'm laying there and somebody's telling me it was my throat, I thought, well, that's it, because I never heard of anybody like recovering from a wound in the throat before.
Well, it was the neck. It was the word he repeated was neck. That neck. You don't survive a shot in the neck.
Yeah, and so he said, I got a couple minutes here.
Yeah, he was certain he was going to die.
Yeah, he's like, say goodbye to my wife for me, and then he ends up living. And
but unlike Churchill, because he was not self-promotional, he didn't turn that into a moment of glory. It wasn't something that he seemed to bask in.
Well, yeah, and if I remember correctly, it wasn't like he was charging into battle when it happened.
No, it was just, not at all. It came from nowhere.
Happened.
It just happened.
He was doing something. He was getting up. He was trying to say something he was like a squad leader. He was like a corporal or something, I guess, like a lower non-commissioned officer, I guess you'd call it. And he was saying something to his troops, and he was dumb enough to get up onto a parapet or something, a rise where he was silhouetted, and he knew there were snipers.
He was 6'2", I believe. He's quite tall.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the sniper's just like,
right,
easy target, sitting duck.
Well, one of the things he did write about, which apparently, I guess if you read military history, which I haven't read a lot of, is that these situations are just filled with long stretches of boredom where nothing's happening. It's not endless excitement or alarm. Most of the time, you're doing nothing. You're reading newspapers. You're cleaning up. You're trying to find ways to keep yourself occupied.
You're dying of disease. It's so many. Combat casualties are not until recently in recent history, but like in most of warfare, people died of illness much more, many-fold more than they died of combat wounds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
So, but while he's laid up, like you said, the commissars are out there like rounding up people and disappearing people. And
and a friend told him that he was on the list and they were looking for him.
Yeah, it's time to get out.
To get out.
And it's all cloak and dagger. Like, it's house to house, and he has to sleep in one place one night and another place the other night till they're waiting for a way to get out. And,
so it was a harrowing escape, but the most important part of this portion of his life is it's extremely formative in the way he views the world, because what he sees is, so anybody who's, you and I have talked about this, anybody who has direct experience of an event and then sees it covered in the press is invariably disappointed.
Oh my God.
If you have real faith in free media, we have faith in free media but when we have direct experience with the thing being covered, we are usually disappointed in the way that it is covered. So
Sure.
what he found was that his side, the leftists, were lying about what was going on in the war just as much as the other side was. And this was kind of shattering to him. He really thought, well, we're the good guys. We don't do that. And he finds out, yeah, everybody does it. Both sides do it a lot.
So here's the quote. I don't know that it's exactly about this particular period of time in the Spanish Civil War, if it's about World War II later, but he says, it applies to both. He says, one of the dreariest effects of this war has been to teach me that the left-wing press is every bit as spurious and dishonest as that of the right, which is basically what you just said. And it's just, it's got to be so deflating to him, especially as a writer and someone who wrote for the left press,
and somebody who if you're going to drop all your stuff and go off to Spain, you're clearly an idealistic person. So this is doubly cutting, that not only is this Civil War not what you thought it was going to be, but you're learning some hard truths about things that you thought you understood.
Yeah. I mean, so he becomes completely disillusioned now with, Stalinist communism. I mean, he knows now, we're fighting fascists on our front and we're fighting our so-called allies in the rear. So like, you can't win, right? It's just, you think like, you see, it's so funny because I interviewed a lady, Tiffany, and she was talking about how she wants to write this book. She wants to write a book about talking animals. And she's like, do you think that would work? And I'm like, Animal Farm. And what was so funny is that not 2 days later, a little library in my neighborhood, I found this book, which
you found that? You found a hardback in a little library? That's fantastic.
I know. Can you believe it? So 1984 and Animal Farm. So
Ricks points out that the subtitle for Animal Farm is a fairy tale.
Right. But apparently there's a long tradition of that. I mean, I didn't think of it until Rick's points it out, but there's, Peter Rabbit. There's, of course, Alice in Wonderland. But there's many more apparently that I had been unaware of. I recognize some of the titles. I didn't read a lot of English talking animal books that were written around 1900, but apparently there's a long tradition of this. So, but not to jump ahead, but we can understand where this, because one of the things about reading Orwell, and I've read both Animal Farm in 1984, not recently as a younger person, but even as a younger person, I was depressed by his just cynicism, and now I know where it came from,
because it's real, and interestingly, American students, your first exposure to Animal Farm is in high school. Typically, that's where I was first exposed to it, and it's a young age, actually, even in teen years, to be exposed to Animal Farm, because it is cynical. Because what your teachers are telling you through this work is that everything you've been told as a kid, happily ever after, do the right thing and everything will be okay, follow the rules and everything will be okay. There are institutions that are trustworthy. You should respect them. You become older and they're trying to give you the first entry to a lot of that is not true. And this is a way to stick your toe in the water through an allegory. You haven't got all the history yet. You don't know where this book came from or what motivated him to write it.
Right.
But the themes are there. These are things that you're actually going to counter in the real world. If you're a thinking person, that you're going to encounter duplicity, but also a lot of grayness, moral grayness.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Animal Farm is not morally ambiguous at all. Neither is 1984. They're very black and white and very clear, but they have their origins in moral ambiguity. They, as Animal Farm does, it all starts off with the best of intentions, and you feel for the animals. Like the farmer, man, they're getting a raw deal from the farmer, man. We got to stand up we got to unionize. We got to stand up for our rights. And it's all coming from a good place, honest intentions. And then we see where it goes when power corrupts, as it always does.
Sure. Yeah. When a movement gets radicalized, right?
When a movement gets radicalized, yes, when things are out of control, when there's no counterbalance, and the pigs never had a counterbalance.
Well, what you sent to me today about the description of Star Wars, when the farm boy,
Oh yeah.
gets taught an ancient religion, radicalized after a military attack on his family.
And then he goes off and he kills 300,000 people.
I mean, that is one way to look at the story, right? That happens.
Those stormtroopers had families, man.
They did actually. They weren't clones at that point.
Who's going to pay their family
Volunteers.
back home?
Oh man, this is how blood feuds get started.
But his